The U-Haul groaned as Remy Thornfra navigated the final turn onto Primrose Lane. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon sun, catching the hopeful glint in his eyes. Beside him, Lily, his 9-year-old daughter, pressed her nose against the window, a quiet wonder spreading across her face. "Look, Dad. The trees." "Yeah, kiddo. Lots of trees," Remy chuckled, reaching over to ruffle her light brown hair. Lakeside Estates. The brochure had promised serenity, community, and the jewel in the crown, a pristine, private lake. After the noise, the concrete, and the constant, low hum of anxiety that had defined their life in the city following his divorce, Lakeside Estates felt like an almost unattainable dream. It was expensive, yes, a stretch for his freelance graphic design income, but the promise of peace for Lily, of wide open spaces and clean air, felt worth every penny. He needed a fresh start, and more importantly, she did. Their new house was a charming, albeit slightly aging, ranch-style home with a generous backyard. It backed onto a wooded area, and somewhere beyond that, the legendary lake. The air here smelled different, of pine needles and damp earth, not exhaust fumes and stale coffee. Lily was already buzzing with quiet excitement, pointing out squirrels and different kinds of birds as he unloaded the first boxes. The first few days were a blur of unpacking and tentative exploration. Lakeside Estates did seem peaceful. Neighbors waved from their porches. Kids rode bikes down the street. It felt like stepping back in time, in the best possible way. Lily, usually reserved, started spending more time outside, her laughter echoing from the backyard swing set Remy had assembled. Their first weekend, they decided to explore the main attraction. Armed with borrowed fishing rods and a bucket of worms, they followed the well-worn path through the woods that led to the lake. It was stunning. The water was clear, reflecting the towering oaks and maples along its banks. A small wooden sign near the path read, "Lakeside Estates Private Lake, Residents Only." Lily cast her line with more enthusiasm than skill, the worms splashing gently near a lily pad. Remy cast his, leaning back against a tree trunk, breathing deep the scent of water and moss. This was it. This was the peace they'd craved. Lily squealed with delight as her bobber twitched. Remy watched, a warm feeling spreading through his chest. Maybe, just maybe, they were finally home. Their idyll was shattered by a crisp, authoritative voice. "Excuse me. Are you residents of Lakeside Estates?" Remy turned to see a woman approaching. She was impeccably dressed in athleisure wear that looked far too expensive for a Saturday afternoon stroll, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. Her posture was ramrod straight, her expression one of mild disapproval. "Yes, we just moved in." "Thornfra." 14, Primrose Lane, Remy replied, a little bewildered. "Thornfra," she repeated, as if tasting something unpleasant. "I am Karen Wellington, president of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association." She didn't offer a handshake. "And I must inform you that fishing is strictly prohibited from the banks of the lake." Remy blinked. "Prohibited? But, the brochure mentioned lake access. And there's a sign that says, residents only." "Access does not imply permission for all activities," Karen cut in, her voice gaining an edge. Section 4, subsection B of the HOA covenants and restrictions clearly states, fishing is permitted only from designated docks or non-motorized watercraft, subject to prior permit application and approval by the Architectural Review Board. Your current activity is a violation. Lily's face fell, her small hand tightening on her fishing rod. The joy of a moment ago evaporated. Wait, a permit to fish? Remy felt a flush of annoyance rising. "We just got here. We didn't see anything about that." "Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse for violation," Karen stated coldly. She produced a small notepad and pen from her pocket. "This will result in a Tier 1 violation notice and a fine of $50. Future violations will escalate." Remy stared at her, then at Lily's crestfallen face. $50. For fishing. The rules are in place to protect the delicate ecosystem of the lake and ensure equitable use by all residents, Karen lectured, though her eyes held no trace of concern for ecosystems, only for enforcing her own authority. You will receive the formal notice by mail. She scribbled something on her pad, then gave them another assessing, dismissive look before turning and walking back the way she came, leaving Remy and Lily standing awkwardly by the water. Lily quietly reeled in her line. "Can we go home, Dad?" The peace Remy had felt minutes ago was gone, replaced by a knot of irritation and a prickle of suspicion. $50 for fishing on a lake that was advertised as a key amenity. Permit applications. Architectural Review Board approval just to drop a line. Something felt very wrong. This wasn't the tranquil community he'd envisioned. This felt like a police state, run by a woman who seemed to relish wielding her petty power. Remy looked at the lake again, the shimmering surface now looking less like a dream and more like a trap. He packed up their gear, a new resolve forming. He wasn't just going to pay the fine. He was going to understand exactly what he'd gotten himself into. The violation notice arrived 2 days later, a formal letter on HOA letterhead detailing the infraction and the $50 fine. It also included a thick packet of documents, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and RS, of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. Remy spent the next few evenings poring over them after Lily was asleep. The CC and RS were extensive, covering everything from lawn height and mailbox color to approved fence types and, yes, lake usage. The section on the lake was particularly convoluted, filled with clauses about permits, designated areas, and preservation zones. What struck Remy most, however, were the fees. Beyond the standard annual dues, there were charges for modifications, permits, access cards, even though the lake had no gate, and vaguely worded, environmental maintenance assessments. And late fees on everything were exorbitant. He also started researching Karen Wellington. A quick online search revealed she'd been HOA president for the last 5 years, running unopposed in the last 2 elections. There were glowing testimonials on the official HOA website, managed, he noted, by a company linked to Karen's husband, but delving deeper into local forums and social media groups revealed a different picture. Whispers of heavy-handed enforcement, arbitrary fines, and a general atmosphere of fear circulated among past and present residents. Remy decided he needed to talk to people face to face. He started subtly, striking up conversations while getting the mail or taking out the trash. He quickly found he wasn't alone in his frustration. His next-door neighbor, Merrick, a retired mechanic with a bushy white mustache, was the first to open up. "Oh, Karen. Yeah, she runs a tight ship, all right." "Tight as a drum and just as hollow," Merrick grumbled one afternoon, leaning against his mailbox. "Got fined $50 last month for leaving my trash can out on the curb 3 hours too long." 3 hours. Across the street lived the Devises, a young family with 2 small kids. Mrs. Davis, Sarah, confided in Remy during a block party, an event Karen had apparently tried to cancel due to unapproved decorations. "We wanted to build a small shed in the backyard for the kids' toys," Sarah sighed, pushing a stray strand of hair from her face. The application process was a nightmare. They asked for architectural drawings, soil samples, 3 different quotes from approved contractors, all listed by the HOA, naturally. Then they denied it, saying it violated the aesthetic continuity of the neighborhood. Meanwhile, old Mr. Henderson on Willow Creek put up a bright purple flamingos display, and nothing happens to him. She rolled her eyes. "Guess he's friends with Karen's husband." The most poignant encounter was with Samuel, an elderly man who had lived in Lakeside Estates since it was first developed in the 70s. Remy found him sitting on a bench near the lake path, sketching in a worn notebook. "Beautiful spot, isn't it?" Samuel said, his voice raspy but kind, after Remy introduced himself and mentioned the fishing fine. "It is," Remy agreed, "though I seem to have broken a rule just by enjoying it." Samuel chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Karen has a lot of rules for that lake now." Used to be, kids would swim here all summer. Fathers would teach their sons to fish right from the bank. It was the heart of the community. He gestured with his sketch pad. See this? This is how it was back then. Docks full of laughing kids, picnics on the shore. The sketch showed a vibrant, lively scene, a stark contrast to the almost empty, regulated space Remy had encountered. What changed? Remy asked. Karen. She moved in about 10 years ago. Joined the HOA board, then quickly worked her way up to president. Started pushing for improvements and protections. New rules, new fees. Made it harder and harder for people to just use the lake. Some folks moved away because of it. Said it wasn't the place they bought into anymore. Remy mentioned the permit system, the restrictions. Samuel nodded sadly. It's all about control. And money, I suspect. The HOA has quite a healthy reserve fund now, according to the statements. But nobody knows where it goes. Karen controls the books with her husband. Samuel's words, combined with Remy's research and the testimony of others, painted a disturbing picture. This wasn't just about petty rules, there was something more calculated at play. He dug deeper into public records related to the original development of lakeside estates and the land surrounding the lake. He discovered that while the houses and streets were part of the HOA, the lake itself and a significant parcel of surrounding land were technically owned by a separate entity, a trust established by the original developer, which was supposed to ensure the lake remained a community amenity. However, the trust's charter had vague wording about future, potential development or transfer under certain conditions, provided the HOA approved. Then came the real breakthrough. Remy found a mention in old online minutes from a town council meeting, not an HOA meeting, referencing a preliminary inquiry about zoning changes for the land parcel surrounding the lake. The inquiry had been made by a shell corporation with a name Remy didn't recognize, but the contact person listed was the same lawyer who represented Karen Wellington in a minor property dispute case Remy found in public court records. The pieces clicked into place, forming a chilling picture. Karen wasn't just regulating the lake, she was slowly making it inaccessible, driving down its perceived value as a community amenity. By making it difficult and expensive to use, she was likely paving the way to argue to the trust, or whoever now managed it, and the town council that the lake was underutilized and therefore ripe for alternative development. Her shell corporation, or a developer she was secretly working with, could then acquire the land for cheap, build condos, townhouses, or commercial properties, destroying the peaceful character of the community and stripping away the very feature that made lakeside estates desirable in the first place. The HOA's healthy reserve fund? Likely being built up, perhaps to cover legal fees, or maybe as a personal slush fund disguised as community money. Armed with this dawning realization, Remy and the other frustrated residents tried the official channels again. They attended HOA meetings, armed with questions about the finances, the lake rules, the lack of transparency. Karen ran the meetings with an iron fist, shutting down questions, declaring topics out of order, or drowning dissenters in bureaucratic jargon. Petitions were ignored. Complaints filed through the official HOA channels vanished into a black hole. The pressure from Karen increased. Remy received another violation notice, this time for his lawn being marginally above regulation height, despite having mowed it 3 days earlier. Sarah Davis was suddenly facing fines for unapproved landscaping, a few perennial flowers she'd planted years ago. Merrick got a notice about his mailbox being out of compliance with updated standards he'd never heard of. It was clear harassment, designed to intimidate them into silence. The tension in lakeside estates thickened. What had seemed like a quiet retreat now felt like a battleground, and Karen Wellington was the entrenched dictator. Remy knew they couldn't fight her using her own rigged system. They needed a different approach, a way to bypass her control and strike at the heart of her plan. The lake. If Karen wanted to exploit the lake, they needed to find a way to protect it first. The frustrations, the fines, and the dawning realization of Karen's true agenda galvanized the small group of dissenters. One evening, under the pretense of a casual backyard barbecue at Remy's place, carefully checking HOA rules to ensure no unapproved social gatherings were listed, Remy, Merrick, Samuel, Sarah Davis, and a few others gathered. "She's bleeding us dry with these fines," Sarah said, her voice tight with stress. "We can barely afford the mortgage and daycare as it is." Merrick grunted. "And she knows it. That's the point. Make you miserable enough to either shut up or sell. We've tried talking to her, tried going through the HOA procedures," Remy said, looking around at the worried faces. "It's useless. She controls the board, she controls the rules, and she controls the flow of information." He paused, then leaned forward. "I've done some digging. About the lake land itself. It's not strictly part of the HOA property. It's held by a trust. And I found some evidence that Karen, or someone connected to her, is looking into getting it rezoned, probably to sell to developers." A wave of stunned silence fell over the group. Samuel finally spoke, his eyes wide. "Sell the lake? But, it's why people live here. It's the community's heart. That's why she's making it unusable," Remy explained. "Depreciate its value as an amenity so she can argue it's better used for something else. If she can get the trust and the town council to agree, we'll have construction crews tearing up the woods, building high-rises, turning our quiet neighborhood into a traffic nightmare." The idea was horrifying, but the anger it sparked solidified their resolve. "We have to stop her," Merrick declared, slapping his hand on the picnic table. "But how?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with despair. "Legal action would cost a fortune, and she's probably got us tied up in knots with the HOA lawyers forever." They brainstormed late into the evening, fueled by coffee and shared outrage. Could they expose her financially? Prove embezzlement? It was hard without access to the real books, which Karen and her husband guarded fiercely. Could they gather enough people to vote her out? The next election was months away, and Karen manipulated the proxy votes expertly. As they discussed the dead ends, Remy had an idea, wild, audacious thought that had been forming in the back of his mind since he discovered the lake land was separate from the HOA property. What if, Remy started slowly, making sure he had their full attention, what if we don't try to stop her from taking the lake, what if we try to acquire it ourselves? The group stared at him blankly, then some exchanged confused glances. "Acquire it?" Merrick frowned. "You mean, buy it?" "Yes," Remy confirmed, feeling a surge of adrenaline at the sheer audacity of the plan. "The trust that owns the land, what if we could make them an offer? A better offer than whatever Karen's shell corporation is planning?" Samuel looked thoughtful. The original developer's intention was for it to be a community asset. Perhaps the trust would be receptive to an offer from the community itself, rather than a developer looking to exploit it. But who would buy it? Sarah asked, practical as ever. The HOA doesn't have that kind of liquid cash, even with Karen's hoard. And none of us individually. "I might be able to," Remy said, his voice lower now. He hadn't shared the full details of his financial situation with his new neighbors. His divorce settlement, combined with some shrewd investments he'd made over the years, had left him with a substantial, if not limitless, reserve. "My design business. I've done well. Enough that I might be able to secure a loan, or even make a direct offer, if the price is right." He quickly explained the concept: form a separate legal entity, a non-profit perhaps, or a community land trust. This entity would purchase the lake land from the original trust. Once owned by the community directly, Karen and the HOA would have no control over it. They could open it up, manage it transparently, and protect it from development forever. The idea was met with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. It was risky, expensive, and fraught with potential pitfalls. What if the trust wasn't interested in selling to them? What if Karen found out and made a counteroffer, driving up the price? What if Remy committed his financial resources and the plan failed? "It's a long shot," Remy admitted. And it would likely take everything I can put together. But it's a way to bypass the HOA entirely. To take away the very thing Karen is trying to control. They discussed the logistics. Remy would need help researching the trust, finding the right contacts, potentially getting legal counsel independent of anything the HOA might be involved with. The group members could use their local connections, their knowledge of the community, their skills. Samuel knew some of the history of the original development. Merrick had contacts in the town council planning department from his old job. Sarah was organized and good with paperwork. The most crucial element of the plan was secrecy. If Karen got even a whisper of their intention to buy the lake land, she would use every resource at her disposal to sabotage it. She could make a preemptive offer, spread rumors, or find some obscure bylaw to cause legal headaches. Their meetings had to be discreet, their communications coded, their research stealthy. They couldn't trust anyone who wasn't in their small circle. They formed a pact that night, a quiet agreement to work together, in absolute secrecy, towards this audacious goal. Remy would lead the financial and legal aspects, drawing on his resources. The others would provide support, information, and a united front if needed. They were no longer just frustrated residents, they were a small, determined resistance, operating in the shadows of lakeside estates, plotting to reclaim their community's heart. The tension remained high, amplified by the need for absolute discretion. Every friendly wave from a neighbor felt potentially suspicious, every car driving slowly down the street seemed like a spy. They were planning a quiet revolution, and one wrong move could cost them everything. The following weeks were a blur of clandestine meetings and focused effort. Remy worked relentlessly, leveraging contacts, consulting with lawyers specializing in land trusts and real estate. Tracing the ownership of the lake land wasn't straightforward. The original developer had passed away, and the trust was managed by a set of trustees in a different state. It took time and persistence to even make contact and ascertain their willingness to sell. Their initial response was cautious but not outright dismissive. They were stewards of the developer's legacy, they said, and the idea of the community itself owning the land was intriguing, fitting with the original vision. However, they were professionals, they needed a solid offer, a clear plan for management, and assurance that the sale would be clean and profitable for the trust. Remy, guided by his small team, crafted a proposal. He presented his financial capabilities, outlined the plan for a community land trust to manage the lake, and emphasized the stability and long-term preservation this option offered compared to potentially disruptive commercial development. He knew Karen was likely making her own inquiries, possibly through back channels or straw buyers, so time was of the essence. He had to move decisively and offer a fair, perhaps slightly generous, price to secure the trustees' commitment. Meanwhile, Karen Wellington remained blissfully unaware of the true nature of their activities. She saw the quietness of Remy's group as a sign of defeat. The fines continued sporadically, just enough to keep pressure on, but without major incidents. She was focused on her own goal, the culmination of her plan. Remy, through Merrick's cautious inquiries at the town hall and Sarah's network of local moms, learned that Karen was finalizing her proposal to the trust and lining up meetings with the town planning committee for the zoning changes. She was confident, arrogant even, that her carefully laid plans were about to pay off. Karen decided to celebrate her impending victory with a grand event, the annual Lakeside Estate Summer Gala, hosted, for the first time in years, directly on the banks of the lake. Invitations were sent out, expensive, glossy cards specifying a dress code and a hefty per-person contribution towards lake beautification. It was clearly designed as a show of power, a chance for Karen to bask in the admiration of her allies and display the prime real estate she was about to control. The date of the gala drew nearer, coinciding ominously with the final stages of Remy's negotiations with the trust. Paperwork needed to be signed, funds transferred, legal hurdles cleared. The tension among Remy's group was palpable. Every phone call felt loaded, every email potentially intercepted. Lily, sensing her father's stress, would sit with him in the evenings, quietly drawing pictures of a vibrant lake with stick figures happily swimming and fishing. The day of the gala arrived. It was a warm, clear evening. Remy had just received confirmation, the deal was done. The papers were signed. The funds had transferred. The Lakeside Estates Lake and the surrounding land parcel were now legally owned by the Lakeside Community Land Trust, a non-profit entity with Remy Thornfra as its initial, sole trustee. He held the certified documents in his hand, a plain folder containing the culmination of weeks of frantic, secret work and a significant portion of his financial future. He felt a wave of exhaustion, relief, and a prickle of anticipation. The battle wasn't over, it was time for the reveal. The gala was in full swing by the time Remy, dressed in a simple but smart suit, walked down the path towards the lake. Merrick, Samuel, Sarah, and the other members of their small alliance were already there, mingling awkwardly, their eyes scanning the crowd, waiting for his signal. The lakefront was transformed. Twinkling lights were strung between trees, a catering tent was set up, and a small stage had been erected near the water's edge. Karen, radiant and commanding in a shimmering blue gown, stood center stage, a microphone in her hand, addressing the assembled residents. Her voice, amplified, carried across the water. And thanks to the diligent work of your HOA board and my personal commitment, Karen was saying, a self-satisfied smile playing on her lips, Lakeside Estates is on the cusp of an exciting new era. We are revitalizing our community, ensuring its prosperity for years to come. The lake, this beautiful asset. Remy walked towards the edge of the crowd, the folder tucked discreetly under his arm. He caught Samuel's eye, then Merrick's. They gave him subtle nods. Has sometimes been underutilized, Karen continued, her voice shifting to a tone of calculated regret. But we have plans. Plans for carefully considered development that will enhance property values and bring new life. Remy stepped forward, raising his voice slightly to be heard above the murmur of the crowd and Karen's amplified speech. Excuse me, Karen. Karen stopped mid-sentence, her smile freezing. Her eyes, sharp and cold, focused on him. Mr. Thornfra. I don't believe you are scheduled to speak. I'm not, Remy said, his voice steady, projecting confidence he didn't entirely feel. But there's something the community needs to know. Something about the lake. A few heads turned. Karen's expression tightened. Any announcements must go through the proper HOA channels, Mr. Thornfra. This is not the time. Actually, I think it's exactly the time, Remy countered, walking closer to the stage. He held up the folder. You see, you've been talking about the future of this lake. About plans for development. But you seem to be operating under a significant misunderstanding. Karen's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease replacing her smugness. What are you talking about? Remy reached the edge of the stage. He opened the folder and pulled out a single, official-looking document. As of this morning, Remy announced, his voice clear and strong, addressing the entire assembly, this lake, and all the land surrounding it within the original trust parcel, is no longer owned by the developer's trust. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Karen's face was a mask of disbelief. That's impossible. My team was finalizing negotiations. Apparently, my offer was more compelling, Remy said calmly, holding up the document. Because I purchased it. The Lakeside Community Land Trust now owns the lake. Free and clear. He saw the exact moment the reality hit Karen. Her eyes went wide, her face draining of color. Her mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. The microphone seemed forgotten in her hand. The crowd erupted. Gasps, murmurs, then a wave of excited chatter. People turned to each other, whispering. Remy's allies in the crowd started to clap, tentatively at first, then louder. Karen found her voice, a choked, furious sound. You can't do that. The HOA has rights. I have agreements. You had plans, Karen, Remy corrected, stepping fully onto the stage now. Plans to take something that was meant to be a community resource and turn it into your private development project. We know about the Shell Corporation, the zoning inquiries, the way you've been making it impossible for residents to use the lake. He held up the document again. This lake is not for sale to developers. It's not a tool for speculation. It belongs to the people of Lakeside Estates now. For fishing, he glanced pointedly at Karen, for swimming, for kayaking, for picnics. For being what it was always meant to be. Karen Wellington stared at him, her face contorted with rage and utter defeat. She looked around at the faces in the crowd, the shock, the dawning understanding, the silent accusations. Her power, built on secrecy and control, crumbled in that instant. She stumbled back from the microphone, knocking over a glass of water. The carefully constructed facade shattered, revealing the grasping, defeated woman underneath. Her planned celebration had become the stage for her public downfall. The aftermath of the gala was swift and decisive. Karen Wellington's public collapse was absolute. The carefully hoarded evidence Remy and his group had gathered, financial discrepancies, emails hinting at the development plan, testimonies of harassment, was quickly presented to the remaining HOA board members, who had mostly been rubber stamps for Karen but were now panicked, and relevant town authorities. An investigation was launched into the HOA's finances and Karen's conduct. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the loss of her power base within the community, Karen resigned as HOA president under duress, shortly followed by her husband and their few remaining allies on the board. Legal consequences, though perhaps not criminal charges for everything, seemed likely for financial mismanagement and abuse of power. Karen Wellington became a pariah in Lakeside Estates, the subject of hushed whispers and averted gazes. Within weeks, her house was listed for sale, a silent acknowledgement of her exile. With Karen gone, the mood in Lakeside Estates shifted dramatically. Remy, Merrick, Samuel, and Sarah formed a transitional committee to stabilize the HOA. They called for new, open elections. Remy declined nominations for president, preferring to stay behind the scenes, but Merrick was elected president, Samuel vice president, and Sarah secretary. The new board's priority was transparency and reform. They immediately began dismantling the oppressive rulebook Karen had created. The ridiculous permits for fishing were abolished. Reasonable rules for lake usage were established, focusing on safety and respect for the environment, not control and fees. HOA finances were audited, revealing years of questionable spending and inflated reserves. They reduced dues, eliminated unnecessary fees, and established a clear, public budgeting process. The Architectural Review Board was reformed into a helpful committee, not a gatekeeping barrier. Most significantly, the Lakeside Community Land Trust, with Remy at its helm, temporarily, began working with the HOA. Plans were made for simple, community-built docks, maintenance of the paths, and organized cleanup days. The lake, once a symbol of oppression, became a symbol of renewed community spirit. Lily was one of the first to truly benefit. With the fishing rules lifted, she and Remy returned to the lake regularly, casting their lines from the bank without fear of fines. Other families joined them. Children swam and splashed where they had been forbidden before. Picnics appeared on the shore. The quiet community Remy had dreamed of began to flourish, not under the heavy hand of arbitrary rules, but through shared purpose and mutual respect. Remy and Lily finally found the peace and happiness they had sought. The initial turmoil had been unexpected and challenging, but it had forged deep bonds with their neighbors and transformed their arrival from a simple move into becoming integral parts of a revitalized community. Remy continued to oversee the land trust for a period, ensuring its mission to protect the lake remained strong, before handing over more responsibility to a permanent, elected board. He was no longer just the new guy on Primrose Lane, he was one of the people who had helped save the heart of Lakeside Estates. The story of the lake on Primrose Lane became a legend in the community, a tale of quiet determination, unlikely alliances, and the power of ordinary people standing up against tyranny. The message was clear: a community thrives not under the iron fist of control, but in the open space of shared ownership, mutual trust, and the simple freedom to enjoy the beauty that brought them together in the first place. And for Remy and Lily, Every ripple on the lake, every child's laugh echoing from the shore, was a reminder that sometimes, the most valuable treasures are the ones you fight to protect, together.